maybe a subset of the BHA and and Rita and Hank can work together to figure out how to make that happen. Because it is something.
Check.
I don't know what the need is. I guess it's more sometimes.
Yeah. It depends.
This is the public hearing on the draft Community Preservation Act plan. We are members of the committee as well as John's. Actually, I asked members to go around and introduce themselves with their reason that they're on the committee, and then everybody will know who we are. I'm Nancy Howard. I am the chair of the Community Preservation Act Committee, and I'm an at-large member.
I'm Joanne Sullivan. I am the designated member from the Brookline Housing Authority because I am the vice chair of the Brookline Housing Authority. So thank you all for coming.
I'm Sam Burrington. I'm a member of the Conservation Commission, a representative.
I'm David Lescalier, an at-large member along with Nancy.
I'm Minnie Kaluri, and I'm a member at large.
Blair Hines. I'm a member of the planning board on this committee.
John?
And I'm John Spires, representing the Historic Preservation Commission on the CPA committee.
Right. And there are two other members we're missing tonight. We're missing Clara Batchelor, who is a representative from Parks and Rec Department, Commission, I'm sorry. And also we're missing Jenny Raitt, who represents the Housing Authority Board. I mean, no.
Housing Advisory.
There's too many habs.
It's true.
Housing Advisory Board. So we're ready to get started. This is a public hearing. And the way we're going to operate tonight is the committee itself is not going to make any comments or take any questions. Our consultants are going to make a presentation, and then we will have questions from the public or comments from the public about the draft plan, which you will see very soon. And because we're in a hybrid mode here, we're going to, for organizational purposes, have members of the public who are in the room ask their questions and make their comments first, and then we will go to those of you who are on Zoom. So please be patient. We haven't forgotten anyone. Okay, so our assistant is Tina McCarthy, and she is recording this meeting and will be in charge of the logistics and let us know whether we're falling off the ladder here. I'd like to introduce to you Jen Goldson and Laura Sneed, who are our consultants, and ask them to begin their presentation.
Just give us a moment to pull that up. Okay. Okay. Looks like I need to be enabled to share. Let's bear with us. Hybrid is always a little touch and go.
Skip to generation.
Yes. Yep. We're good. Okay. So let's pull this up. There we go. We'll make it a little bigger in theory. Maybe I will actually share this. I think the other one was a bit better. Sorry. There we go. This one lets me make it a little bigger. At least on my screen, maybe not on your screen. Oh, there it goes. Okay, perfect. All right, I think we're all set. Thank you for your patience. So tonight we're gonna start with basically some basics because and some of you, how many of you were at the charrette that we held previously? Okay, yeah, a few hands in the crowd. Maybe there's some of you in the virtual audience as well. You'll hear some of the same information repeated tonight, just because we want to make sure that everybody in the public hearing is on the same page with some of the background information, given that CPA is still new to the community. So just a little bit of patience on your end as well. And then we'll talk about what we heard, some of the key findings out of the community engagement that we have done in this process. And then at the end, we'll cover, as a result of all of the background work and community engagement, what are some of the overall Community Preservation Act plan policies, the sort of overall lenses on which the application process will be built and proposals will be viewed from, as well as specific Community Preservation Act plan category goals at a high level. And of course, the plan itself has more detail on each of those things. So I do encourage you to look at the full document, but for the sake of time, we're just going to cover a high level tonight. All right, CPA basics in a nutshell. So I'll do a little bit of this, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jen Goldson for talking about eligibility. So the Community Preservation Act was a law that came into effect in 2000. You can see that over half the state now has adopted this law. There's a number of cities as well as many, many towns. And this was, it's a law that allows communities to basically do a small surcharge on your local property taxes to generate additional revenue for 4 specific topics: open space and natural resources, historic resources or historic preservation, community housing, which is there's details about why it's community housing and not affordable housing is you're allowed to go slightly higher on income, but we'll get into that later. And outdoor recreation. There's a lot of detail, if you're curious, for a lot of great resources on the Community Preservation Coalition website, where you can learn a lot more ins and outs about CPA itself. So in Brookline, this was adopted in May of 2021. They adopted the local property tax surcharge at 1%. It goes between 1% and 3%. So they adopted it just at 1%. And then there's a variable state distribution also. So it's not quite a match exactly. It varies from year to year. And as a result, as of, I believe this month, there's, about $6.5 million and growing. That'll continue to grow every year. That is available for those 4 funding areas. So we just got an introduction to the Community Preservation Act Committee. They're really responsible for helping guide this plan, this work, and deciding what are the needs, possibilities, and resources and funds. And then they're responsible for reviewing applications that they will receive of different projects through an application process that will happen this fall, and vetting those projects for eligibility and through different policies and goals, and ultimately making a recommendation to town meeting for which projects and in what amount to fund. And then town meeting then has to actually vote to approve that. So it's not a done deal until town meeting actually votes on the money. All right, and I think we kind of I covered this in the last slide too. So this plan though is for the next 5 fiscal years. And it's really to help both the Community Preservation Act committee as well as applicants know and be transparent about what goals of the town are, what needs are, what is going to make for an appealing project proposal to help vet, and also to help applicants know what's going to help make their proposal more eligible or appealing. So there's some basic rules around it. At least 10% of the overall amount of money has to be set aside for 3 topics: community housing, open space / recreation. You'll notice those 2 funding topics get combined into one funding bucket, and historic preservation. And then 70% is undesignated and can be used for any one of those three areas. It can't go for other purposes besides those three areas, but it can go to any one of those topics, or, things can roll forward into a future year. And up to 5% can be used for administrative costs. So especially for a community the size of Brookline, there is a lot of administrative work done to receive applications and make sure things are eligible and get things through. So there's reporting and all of that. So there's administrative costs is also an eligible expense. With the slight caveat that this can't also supplant town operating budgets. Okay, so it's important to emphasize that someone actually needs to apply for it to receive these funding. So you might have a great idea. You also need to make sure that whoever, if it's something, whether it's an item or a property, usually in almost all cases, it's going to be public property, like a town-owned land or something like that, or a nonprofit involved. But you have to have a letter of support or agreement or understanding with the owner that they're okay with it. Then there's going to be an application process that we're going to be that's kind of the next step in this entire project with the town, is determining what that application process and application form, if you will, looks like. So there is an application process that someone would go through and have to back up, have an argument for why their project is a good one and why it's eligible and so forth. And then the Community Preservation Action, CPAC, let's just go with that, would review that and probably in more than one meeting, and ultimately come to a decision on what they're going to vote forward to town meeting. And then town meeting, that would have to go on, the warrant article and everything like you would for allocating funding for just about anything. And then town meeting votes on that. Okay, so in terms of the overall, I alluded to this a little bit earlier. So we have a couple of phases in our consulting work with the town. We're toward the latter part of the actual Community Preservation Act plan formation. This public hearing is the last significant step for this sort of strategic plan for the next 5 years for the public to weigh in. And we'll be revising the plan based on what we hear tonight and comments that we hear. And then we're going to start thinking about what the application review process looks like, so that the committee has everything they need ready to go for this fall, which is the first actual funding cycle for CPA. And they'll be receiving applications this fall and vetting them through the winter so that things are ready to go to be allocated in the spring at town meeting. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk about eligibility.
Thanks, Laura. I hope you guys thought that was interesting. I know a lot of you may have heard this spiel before. So we're going to go pretty quickly through eligibility because I do think a lot of you have heard me talk about this before, but we're happy to take questions at the end. We're going to do this a little differently than the public forum, which was a little bit less formal than this. So we're going to go ahead and go right through, and then Laura will come back and we'll talk about the actual what's in the plan. So let's think about general eligibility. In general, I want you to think of CPA more as a bricks and mortar grant program, not so much about education. So sometimes people say, well, can't we do trail maps and brochures and, educational programs about these community preservation resources? And the answer is not usually. So this is really about real property. It's about things, it's about places, it's about buildings, landscapes, even objects. And we'll get into that a little bit more in detail. Then the other thing Laura did mention, you can't supplant municipal funds. So if you have, let's say, a staff position funded already, CPA can't be used to help with their funding, even if they're working on CPA, type things. But what you can do is create a new staff position or designate, a portion of someone's time that could be paid for CPA, by CPA. And that time, we would recommend just, you want to document that carefully to make sure that what the town is paying for is actually being used to support the Community Preservation Act Committee. So the third thing here is if CPA funds are used to buy real property, which you can do, you need to bind that property then with a deed restriction for whatever CPA purpose it was purchased for. So you could buy property to create affordable or community housing. You can buy property to protect a historic resource from being demolished or to put it to good use. But it has to have then a deed restriction that is in perpetuity for the purpose that it was purchased for. So that's important to remember. Sometimes people get hung up on that, and towns have bought open space, but then they don't have a holder for the deed restriction. So it's a little tricky. If the town is buying something under its own name, you need to have a third party to actually hold that deed restriction. So this happens a lot in open space acquisitions. There needs to be some entity that's not the town, because the holder of the deed restriction needs to enforce the rules and the restriction against the town, and the town can't do that to itself. So even if land is put in custody of the Conservation Commission, you think, well, their whole purpose is to preserve the land, to conserve the land. You still need a third party, and that's where a lot of communities get a little bit hung up with this. All right. So can you fund private property? The short answer is yes, but you do need to make sure that there's a public purpose. And so if let's say you're funding, I'm just going to pick a common private property that's funded across CPA communities is a historical society. It's a, private nonprofit organization. It's not the town. And you can use CPA funds to fund eligible activities on historic society property, but you need to demonstrate that there is a public purpose. So sometimes that's done through a deed restriction if the property is not already deed restricted. Sometimes it's done through a public access easement. Sometimes it's done through some kind of agreement to give, free days to access for town residents. There's all sorts of different ways to do that, but I just want to draw that to your attention. All right, let's talk about community housing. We're going to go, I think we're going in order of the alphabet. So we're starting with community housing. Laura already alluded to this. Why is it called community housing and not affordable housing, as the term is more commonly people know about affordable housing more than community housing? Well, the short answer is you can have both homes and programs that go up to a higher income. So we're showing the incomes as they stand now. So you can see in the kind of the reddish orange color under each household size is the 80% of the area median income. That's what we mean when we say affordable housing, pretty much. We mean for households that earn at or below that 80% AMI. And there's all sorts of tiers below that. But then CPA can actually go up to the median, 100% of the area median based on that household size again. And that's shown in black. Now, this number is a moving target. It changes every year, but we just wanted to give you a sense of what it is now. So for a single person living alone, if they made 104,510 or less, they could qualify for what we call under the CPA community housing. And if that person made 83,608 annual income or less, they could qualify potentially for affordable housing. And I say potentially because it's a little more complicated than that. There are assets that are looked at and all sorts of things that go into this kind of decision. But we just wanted to give you a sense of when we use the term affordable housing and when we use the term community housing, what kind of homes and what kind of programs could that fund? All right. So under community housing, you can acquire property. You can actually do that in any of the categories. You can create housing units. You don't have to buy the property in order to help create the units. Typically, that's done through a private developer or a nonprofit developer, or sometimes the housing authority may have a project where they're creating new units. You can also preserve existing units. Now, sometimes that means fixing the units, and you have to be careful about that. And you see that little asterisk, the footnote on the bottom. It says you can't rehab, but you can preserve under community housing. And this gets super complicated for people. And we have to keep, kind of drawing that line, because there's a bit of a gray area that you're not quite sure. Well, are we preserving or are we rehabilitating? So the easy way to just think about it is preserving just means you're protecting the resource from harm. That's the definition in the CPA statute. And what that means when you translate it to a building or to community housing, it could mean that you're preserving the actual affordability of the unit. Maybe the deed restriction is set to expire, or there's a affordable condo and they can't find an eligible buyer and it might go to market. That kind of thing you can do with CPA funds, and that can be to preserve the affordability itself. But you can also do physical preservation. Let's say the roof is leaking at the housing authority and it's harming the resource, which is the community house, which is the affordable housing in this case. You can fix that roof if it's broken, basically. But rehab is just an example, fixing the roof if it's not broken. It just happens to be nearing the end of its lifespan. Unfortunately, I shouldn't put my own opinion in here, but I think that's unfortunate that it is not eligible. But you do have to look at that distinction. The other thing you can do is support. This is the only CPA category that includes that word support. And what does that mean? That basically means programs. So you can do homebuyer programs, you can do rental assistance programs, you can do emergency programs. There are lots of different types of programs that people have done. You can also do things like hire a housing coordinator. So, and some communities have also made the argument that under support, they can do some planning work. Now, it depends on who you ask if you can actually do that or not. Lawyers don't always agree on exactly what you're allowed to do under support, but I know that some communities do planning work under support if it's meant to further community housing. All right. So I'm going to go through these examples real quick. They're the same ones that we showed last time. So this is an example of using an existing historic building, an old school, to convert it to affordable housing. Now, this had lots and lots of funding sources. The CPA was just a very small part of a multi-million-dollar project, but CPA funds or any other local funds can be used to show the state and other funders that the locality supports something. And so even if it's a small amount, it can really help the project get the rest of the funds, basically. So that's an example in Sharon. And this was actually put towards both affordable housing and historic preservation. This is a preservation of affordability restrictions that were going to expire. This had reached the end of it was either a 30 or 50 year borrowing that originally created this rolling green apartments in Amherst. And so the town of Amherst helped to find another developer, negotiated a deal, and they bought this and they used some CPA funds to help make that deal work. And then they preserved those affordable units. You can also construct new units. This is an example in Boston. And so there's lots of examples of that all over the state. They could be small, they could be larger like this one. I've seen lots of Habitat for Humanity type size places as well. So this is just an example. And again, with this kind of project, especially these larger ones, CPA would be one of many, many funding sources and probably not even a very big part of it. But again, it can show that local support in this case too. Or sometimes it just helps to close that gap. This is an example of just a smaller project. This is veterans housing that was created in Hingham. They converted this existing house to 6 units in the house for supportive housing for veterans. All right, so there's lots of examples I could give. So hopefully that gives you just a sense. Let's move on to historic preservation. So what does historic resource even mean? It's not just buildings, it's also vessels, real property, documents, and artifacts. But the trick is it has to be listed on the state register. And if it's not listed on the state register, then you need to go to the local historic commission and ask the commission to determine if this resource is locally significant. So you need to be aware of that step. If you have a historic preservation project, the first thing you want to do is just make sure, is this property listed on the state register of historic places? And you just go to this site called MACRIS. If you Google MACRIS, and I usually put a comma MHC and it comes right up. You can look, it has the designation for everything. Now, if you're doing a document or an artifact, you don't have to look it up because none of them are listed on the state register. So you always have to get the local historic commission's vote to determine that any documents or artifacts are eligible. All right, so let's move on here. All right, so now you know what a historic resource is. Now I'm going to tell you what you can do with it. So similar verbs here, except you'll see that restore and rehab are added, whereas in community housing, you did not have either one of those. You also don't have create here because you can't actually create a historic resource. It's either there, it's not. And you don't have the word support here. I'm not going to get into all these. Some of these are really specific to historic preservation but the idea here is that you can either buy property to protect it. You can also buy a property interest, which basically means you can buy a deed restriction. You can buy, in this case, a preservation restriction. So the property still remains in whoever's hands it's in, but now the town has bought a preservation restriction. So it can never be torn down, and any changes to the exterior, typically, although it can also be the interior, need to be approved. And then you can preserve, restore, and rehabilitate. And those all have specific meanings, but it's very broad in historic preservation as long as you're complying with the Secretary of the Interior standard. So you can't, slap up vinyl siding or do something that's not appropriate to preserve the integrity of the resource. And I'm sure Tina and the wonderful staff that you have in Brookline can help you understand what can you do and what can you not do with historic preservation funds. All right. I almost forgot to say the footnote here, you can't actually do any maintenance. And that gets a little tricky too, because sometimes people say, well, is painting maintenance or is painting rehab or preservation? And the answer is it depends, right? If it's part of a 10-year, every 10 years, you got to paint this thing, then that's part of maintenance. If this has gone so beyond that 10 years, maybe it's been 50 years since it's been painted, it needs to have a bunch of siding replaced and all sorts of other things done. And, it also needs to be painted after we replace the siding. Well, that is eligible. So it all depends. All right. Okay, so some examples, a lot of communities have used, well, you don't have historic, well, maybe this will be historic soon. Maybe it is. I shouldn't speak. But a lot of communities have preserved their historic municipal buildings. I'm sure you have other historic municipal buildings, not just your town hall. One thing I should say out of preservation, restore and actually rehab means to bring it up to code. That's part of the definition. So you can do things like accessibility, bring it up to other codes, even the stretch code or the plumbing codes, etc. So that's something that you should know about under historic preservation, in particular under rehabilitation. You could do archaeological projects. This is an example in Acton, and they combine this. A lot of CPA projects that are most well loved combine many different elements. So this is one that combines both recreation and open space project with an archaeology. This is one that is showing an artifact, the Nantucket fire engine. So you can preserve artifacts. You just have to be careful if they're being shown in a private space. You need to just demonstrate that there is a public benefit. So can the public get in there? And what is the public benefit? So something to be careful about. And then this one was a complicated deal where the town actually used CPA funds to stop a development. And although the development would have created some housing, I just want to be more clear than I did in the last presentation. It would have demolished that I have it right here, good, because I couldn't remember, 1783 historic resource to put up a subdivision of essentially McMansions. They were going to be luxury single family homes that would have eaten up quite a bit of this farm. This was an old farm from the late 1700s. And so the town bought it, preserve the house. They actually found it's not technically an affordable home, but they found a low to moderate income homeowner to purchase this property. And they have a deed restriction because the town purchased it. They needed to find a third party to hold the deed restriction. And so they found Historic New England that now holds that deed restriction. And then they also bought all the open space around it. And I'll show you that in a minute because it was a kind of a combo project. So you can do creative deals like that as well. You can also restore documents. This is the Declaration of Independence. And what they did was they created climate control. So they could store this in a climate controlled space. All right. This is more of a natural resources. They restored the landscape and did some excavation to restore channels and letting that salt water back into the marsh to restore natural habitat. So this was less about the use by people and more about habitat restoration. And then in terms of what is eligible, we have, sorry, I think this might have been out of order. That one should have been, I'm sorry, that one should have been after this next slide. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but in any event, now you saw one of the examples. So open space eligibility, it includes not just open space as you might think of, conservation land, but it also includes water resources, agriculture, fields, other habitat, even scenic vistas. And so you can acquire, create, and preserve. And you might say, well, how do you create open space? And what this usually means is, like the example I just showed you, restoring land back to its natural state. It can also mean tearing something down. There's been at least one community on the Cape that tore down a motel to create open space. And then you can do preservation. Some examples of that is like removal of invasive species is often used under preservation of habitat land. So this is an example in Cambridge of implementing their watershed master plan for a fresh pond reservation. This one is the same project I showed you, the Keith Homestead. It just shows you the open space piece. They bought all of that to connect to existing Department of Fish and Game space all around. All right, and then outdoor recreation eligibility. And you'll remember from Laura's section a few minutes ago, the 10% requirements combine recreation and open space. But most communities look at that for purposes of eligibility as two different things. Now, not all communities do. Boston decided to create that as one category. But what we've done here when we put together the draft plan is we did keep them separate. These are really more geared toward people and recreation. So you have things like community gardens, trails through conservation land, but still the project would be about the trails, not so much about the habitat or acquiring the land. Parks, playgrounds, even athletic fields, although the caveat here is you cannot use CPA funds to install artificial turf. You can do other things like the lights and other things necessary to get the space ready even, but you can't install that turf with CPA funds. You can't buy that turf with CPA funds. You also can't do things that are inside. That's why the statute I don't think the statute actually says outdoor recreation. We add that because we just want to emphasize this is about outside. It's not about an indoor swimming pool or a gymnasium or a stadium. All right, so some examples. This one is another land purchase. There's a lot of land purchases with CPA funds across the state. So this one is to create, you can see a bunch of fields and you can see trails. So it was a kind of a multi-use complex in Hanover. This one is a playground. I could have pulled up hundreds of these examples. Taking an old playground with unsafe equipment, outdated equipment, not accessible equipment, and basically buying new equipment, putting new surfacing down. It's a very common project. This one is the rail trail, a walking and biking trail in Newburyport. And then just to end this section of the presentation, a lot of communities also do multiple CPA purposes in one project. And this is an example in Wareham that combined housing, open space, and recreation. There's a number of examples of this. There's another really interesting one in Rowley and other places. And let me actually, before Laura goes up, let me just say one thing. If you do buy land, and I just want to put this in your mind, you can buy land with CPA funds and not know how you want to use it yet. And the way communities have written those warrant articles is basically saying, we're buying this for the purposes of housing, open space, recreation, and or historic preservation, basically to be determined at a later date. And then whatever, and oftentimes you can combine things, but sometimes you decide we want to buy this quickly because it's going to be lost for some reason. We don't know exactly what it's going to be used for. Well, you can do a study afterwards and then figure out what it's going to be used for. So there are examples of how to write that warrant article up. Okay. I hope that was helpful, Laura. Thanks.
All right. So for community engagement for the draft plan, we had over 800 Brookline residents participate in some aspect of the community engagement that we did, whether that was focus groups or an online community survey or attending the in-person charrette that was held. And when it comes to the survey, more than half of the respondents felt that the Community Preservation Act plan and the committee should be promoting projects that support the town's climate and resiliency goals. And just shy of half felt that they should be promoting projects supporting the town's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you'll see some of that move forward then into some of the kind of overall policies of the Community Preservation Act plan. And also, there was some feedback from the community that, the developable land in Brookline is so limited that funds should be really used to be strategic to implement existing town goals and plans and combining interests wherever possible. So Jen showed that slide of that kind of trifecta arrangement. And I think that's something that could potentially work really well for Brookline, where you're able to hit more than one need with the same act, basically. Some of the more popular projects and initiatives in each one, ideas were, an emphasis in affordable housing for low and moderate income families, enhancing public walking and multi-use paths. That's really kind of a recreation item, but I also know that, restoration of your native habitats is also pretty highly rated. And then you have a number of outdoor recreation facilities that have already been pre-vetted and flagged for, needing some improvements. So actually making those improvements to the existing locations is a high priority. And then also same, just protecting, especially historic landscapes and structures. So, not even necessarily buildings or documents, although those are also a good goal, but in terms of the public's preference, there was an emphasis on landscapes and structures. So like a bridge as opposed to a building. This is just one example of a pom-pom activity that we did at the charrette. We asked similar questions in all the different engagement activities, but at the charrette, it was visualized pom-pom. So, there's 70% of the overall funds that are sort of undesignated. So when you look to weight priorities, participants at the charrette were able to drop 7 pom-poms representing each one 10% of the undesignated funds into different buckets of funding categories. And of those two, they were all actually relatively close across the categories, but both in the survey and at the charrette, community housing and open space really rose to the top as a bit higher than historic preservation and recreation, but all four have to be funded. But for undesignated funds, looking at those two areas were of special interest to the community. So for the overall CPA policies, then these are really kind of cross-cutting lenses that the Community Preservation Act plan and the committee would look at when vetting proposals. And that's what this slide really represents. You have the individual category goals and then lenses of which to view through those goals and proposals. So we have the policy to prioritize funding for initiatives that advance climate resilience and sustainability, prioritize projects to further Brookline's diversity, equity, inclusion. And in the plan, the full document of the plan, we do have some more description as to what that means and other plans that kind of tie into that and rationale. As well as, the emphasis of community housing and open space and natural resources, doing funding for multi-purpose projects or ones that fall into more than one funding category, and also leveraging the value of CPA through additional public or private funds. So if a applicant is showing, Jen alluded to this in some of the housing projects too, that oftentimes you might be able to bring multiple funding sources to the table and say, I really need some CPA funds to bridge this gap, or this CPA funds could be used as a match for this other grant that I'm also applying for. And that can really help those dollars stretch farther. So in terms of the actual category goals, beginning with housing, this draws both from the recent housing production plan work that the town did, as well as feedback from the community engagement. So we have creating and preserving moderately priced home ownership units. So things that are filling that gap a little bit above 80%, up to 100% area median income, trying to emphasize home ownership over rental to really enable some of that wealth growth that can happen with actual home ownership. And then creating, preserving, and supporting housing for the very low to extremely low income people. So you kind of have both a little bit more on the higher end of what's eligible as well as the lower end, especially people who might have special needs or at risk for homelessness, older adults, and people with disabilities. So really the most vulnerable around us. And then the third one is to create, preserve, and support multifamily rental housing for very low to extremely low income household of all types, but especially households with children. Okay. So historic preservation, we have restoring historic landscapes and structures. There's that language again, especially when projects offer environmental benefits or honor the history of marginalized populations. So here we're trying to kind of show how restoring historic landscapes and structures can tie into some of those broader policies. Preserving private historic resources at risk of demolition due to development or neglect and will provide a demonstrated public purpose. Preserving or rehabilitating town-owned historic buildings, especially incorporating green historic preservation techniques per the Climate Action Plan. So again, sort of looking at that through the lens of broader policy. Increasing public accessibility to historic sites through improvements to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act and other building or access codes. And preserving the town's historic artifacts or documents, especially when documenting historically marginalized voices. For open space goals, looking to promote climate equity and resilience by acquiring, creating, and preserving open space in areas prone to urban heat island impacts or flooding, including protecting and expanding the tree canopy on open space sites. Acquiring or protecting open space with conservation value at risk to development. Preserving open space threatened by invasive species through removal, native species planting, and restoration. And last but not least, before we take some questions, for recreation, looking to rehabilitate and restore existing parks, not new, but existing parks, playgrounds, and athletic fields identified in recent planning efforts, while considering underserved areas, environmental benefits, racial equity, economic equity, and age friendliness. So, and then now we kind of get into more like new things as well. So supporting the acquisition, this number range actually it's cited here, the plan that it came from, but the 73 to 105 acres of additional land for all outdoor active and passive recreational purposes per the 2020 athletic fields needs assessment and master plan. And now keep in mind that that's certainly not going to happen overnight. But this is a plan that's with a 5-year horizon, and the athletic fields needs and master plan, it has an even longer time horizon. So that's really kind of a long-term goal, but to make progress toward that goal. Creating new recreational resources for all seasons. So especially an outdoor pool, outdoor ice skating rink, skate park, and dog park. And creating new and rehabilitated existing walking and biking trails to strengthen the connections between existing open spaces identified in section J of the master plan update. So with that, we're happy to start taking we're interested in your feedback, questions, comments, and thoughts. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Laura.
Would
That
it be
was
helpful to
very
stop
informative.
sharing my screen?
Pardon?
Okay.
Okay. So I think we should start with the people who are in the room asking their questions and making their comments. Thank you all for coming. We're pleased to have you. And I'm going to call on you as I see your hand raised. I saw Shawnlyn Jones. Could you come to the podium and identify yourself?
I'm Shawnlyn Jones. I live at 53 Monmouth Street. I recently became president of the Brookline Green Space Alliance, and I'm also a town meeting member from Precinct 1. And I want to begin by commending the committee for its work so far. The draft plan's goals are an impressive combination and a synthesis, really, of the existing plans for urban forests, athletic fields, open space, recreation, housing, and probably more, with all that input that came in through the community engagement process. And it's really impressive and not easy to bring all of this together. So I congratulate everyone who's worked on this so far to produce the draft. Because I'm president of the Green Space Alliance, I'm not surprisingly going to focus on some of the issues of parks, open space, and recreation in the draft plan. And in this area, the draft plan has identified a lot of important and quite ambitious goals, even taking into account this is a 5-year timeframe you're looking at, including updating and improving our existing parks and playgrounds, creating walking trails, planting more trees, increasing climate resiliency, acquiring more space and open space and athletic fields, and fighting invasive species. And I know residents of Brookline support these goals and others that are in the draft plan. The report we just heard said that there was essentially a tie between housing and open space. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, but it seemed like open space plus recreation had a slight edge in the survey, but it was certainly, these were two very popular ideas in the community engagement process, the survey and the charrette. And so my first major comment and recommendation is overall, I very much hope that the committee is going to strike a balance between using the community preservation funds for open space and recreation and devoting funds to housing. These are clearly the two biggest areas, and I hope that the funds will be allocated roughly equally between the two of them, since they're both important and popular. And I want to emphasize that striking that kind of balance is not just a matter of addressing the requests of different constituencies with different interests and goals. It's really a community necessity, because if we are going to add housing and if we are going to add population, and both through the CPA process and other issues that are under discussion in Brookline, there's a high likelihood that the population will grow, particularly in multifamily areas. Building that housing goes hand in hand with increasing and enhancing our parks, open space, and recreational facilities. We're going to need more parks if we have more housing and more population. And in particular, if that housing tends to be in densely populated multifamily areas, including affordable units, transit-oriented development, it's going to be necessary to invest even more heavily in the community parks and playgrounds that provide active and passive recreation for all the residents of that new housing. Now, we had an allusion earlier in the presentation to earlier reports that have identified the need for more parks, more open space and recreation facilities. And the figure of between 73 and 105 acres being required for both passive and active recreation was mentioned. And I'll just point out that in the 2020 master plan and recreation and open space strategic plan that came up with that figure, the calculation for the population increase suggested that it would be not even until 2028 that we would reach the population that Brookline had in the 2020 census. So that's really kind of a backward looking figure in terms of calculating on the basis of population what we need. And obviously 73 to 105 acres is a daunting figure to begin with. But I'm saying if you look out ahead, you add more housing and you more population, our needs are going to grow. And I think that point needs to be recognized when we fund those two different priorities. Now, turning to the specifics of how the CPA funds for parks and open space will be used, I've got two general comments about the priorities within the open space and recreation category. First, CPA funds should be used for land acquisition. As the draft plan notes, Brookline needs more parks, needs more acres for open space, passive and active recreation. And significant funds should be set aside annually for that land acquisition, either in an existing fund or a new fund. Now, this is particularly important because apart from CPA funds, there is no other town dedicated source of funds for this purpose. For years, the Brookline Green Space Alliance has called for setting aside funds for land acquisition. Now that Brookline has voted to accept the Community Preservation Act, there finally will be a stream of funds available for this purpose. Let's not miss this opportunity. Second, the plan should go even further in giving priority to creating new pocket parks and playgrounds in Brookline's high-density areas. I realize this goal is implicit in the plan, but it needs to be made even more explicit. Finding space for such parks can be challenging, but these small spaces can serve a lot of people for relatively, that's in Brookline terms, small investment in land acquisition and construction. Pocket parks and playgrounds, along with more street trees and trees on private property, also advance all the goals that we've talked about or heard talked about already. Environmental equity, absorbing carbon emissions, helping to cool down heat islands, and generally contributing to mental health. There are a lot of other ideas in the draft plan for parks, open space, and recreation. And in highlighting these two, I don't want to say we should slide any of the others, but I do want to emphasize that we could focus and make sure we do address this need for land acquisition and more pocket parks and playgrounds. To sum up, I've made three major comments. Let's make sure we balance the allocation of funds between housing and recreation and open space. And when it does come to open space, my second point is let's set aside some funds for land acquisition. And third, let's make sure the plan does emphasize pocket parks and playgrounds, especially in the densely populated areas of Brookline, those that might actually be seeing more multifamily housing construction. Now, beyond these general comments, it's probably premature to talk about specific ideas for applications for community preservation funds. I've heard about some great ideas. One might be to use CPA funding for restoring the Beacon Street bridle path along that would bring back part of Olmsted's original conception for Beacon Street. I've also heard that maybe the funds would be available for the stone bridges in the Emerald Necklace Parks. I'm not sure about the eligibility and the details of all of these, but there are clearly some great ideas. And the Brookline Green Space and I look forward to seeing many applications that ask the committee to fund parks, open space, and recreation. And we hope that you'll be able to ensure that the necessary funds are spent on these items, taking into account the preferences of Brookline's residents in the survey and the charrette. Thank you very much for all you're doing.
Thank you, Sean. Deborah Brown.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deborah Brown. I am a Brookline resident, and I am also the board president for the Brookline Community Development Corporation. We are Brookline's CDC, and our mission is to make sure that there's adequate, safe, and affordable housing here in Brookline. And I want to begin by thanking everyone. I mean, the work that y'all did, I can tell you put a lot into it. I can also tell that you've probably looked at many other communities for points of comparison. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that the committee, this is no small feat. So thank you. I wanted to begin by saying that, I come at this through a housing lens today. But I will tell you that by way of professional background, it's probably closer to historic preservation and a lot of historic preservation, actually, and open space as an environmental professional. But one of the things that has become loud and clear to me over the last 3 or so years is just how fundamentally important housing is. Safe housing, sanitary housing. In this town, you might not think about it, but children that live in housing that has been underinvested in, they walk around with a certain amount of shame and stigma, and people don't like to talk about it. But that has an impact in terms of how little Johnny and Bernadette perform in school. It has an impact in terms of what their executive function ends up being. So housing, it plays such a basic and critical role in terms of who we are. When I look at senior citizens, and this is a slight digression, but I've been around lots of different houses in Brookline, and on the outside you see some of these houses and they look really magnificent. You go in there and it's just like, boy, these people are hanging on by a thread. I know CPA may not in the most technical scheme be able to help them, but I have to believe that with some creativity, we can find ways for our senior citizens to age in place with dignity and in a safe manner. And I think that's the kind of creativity, that we hope to bring to the table, because we're really talking about people's lives. If your housing is inferior, you're not going to live as long. If you're struggling that much, you're not going to eat particularly well. I mentioned education. I think housing promotes sustainability. I think Sean is onto something. My professional experience is that, when you start talking about redevelopment of properties, you have to factor in green space. You have to. It's what we have to do. And it's not because it's a nice thing to do. I think it goes to our very survivability as a species. So I'm going to ask you that as you think about, this plan, that at least 30% be directed toward housing. That at least 30% be directed toward housing. And that doesn't mean that we don't hit on the other things. Because I'm the queen for 3 for 4 fours. If there's a way to leverage something else out of it, we should. But I can tell you that if we get $10,000 in CPA money for housing, and I just use that as a number, I bet we can leverage another 90,000. And that's the only way housing is going to get built. And the state needs to know that we're invested, that this is one of our priorities and not just lip service, but something that we carry around and we fundamentally believe in. So let's build and create housing. But there's another part of me and that also believes that we need funds for rental assistance to support people. And you might say, well, yeah, but what is that going to look like? If I told you that maybe 20-25% of extremely low income renters are behind in their rent, would you be surprised? So suppose I told you that without the proper counseling and access to capital, that could have a huge domino effect. And that, so it's not just that person who's behind in their rent, but all of a sudden it's their children who are impacted. It's other family members who are trying to contribute. And so I would beg of you to consider that as an area for investment, right?
Deborah, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to let you know that you've already gone over 4 minutes, and
Oh, I didn't know there was a.
there wasn't a limit. I never suggested one, but Sean went for about 4 to 5 minutes. And so I'll set the limit at 5 now, and we'll go as far as we can. But I just wanted to know it's running close. So if you have more, and we like your suggestions, we'd like to hear more of them if you have them. So,
Oh, I have a few more suggestions.
okay, so why don't you list them for us?
If I had known, it would have been a very different presentation. One of the things that I want to talk about, aside from, making a strong investment in affordable housing, is really looking at all this work through an equity lens. So here's a really simple example. I heard all of the conversation about parks and recreation. I will tell you that in my neighborhood, there's a dearth of basketball hoops. In fact, the only basketball hoop that I'm aware of is at BHA property. And that's just a one back and forth. And otherwise, I think you might have to go over to Pierce, or you have to go over to near Clearflower. That's a long way to go if you're a 10-year-old and you want to be close to home and play basketball. So look at it through that equity lens. The other thing that I would like to ask is that in looking through that equity lens, to remind you that the town signed on to comply with the Government Alliance for Racial Equity, the GARE principles. I won't repeat them because clearly I have already run over. But basically, in a nutshell, it says, saying it is not enough. You got to do it. People from disparate backgrounds need to have a role in shaping this program. And that can't just be people. That can't just be me. You got to figure out how to reach out and get to people that have more on the ground perspectives, than maybe everybody here in this room. And so that means getting out of this place and going to where the people are. Think about how you reduce the disparity. Think about how you reduce the disparity. I saw a lot of goals up there, and I'm wrapping up, Nancy.
Okay.
But most of them were not measurable. When I see something that says build more affordable housing, that don't mean diddly to me. If you say build 50 units by 2027, that is a measurable goal. But when you keep it too loosey-goosey, you end up with nothing. And if we're talking about the very survivability of our natural environment, to the people in the natural environment, I would encourage you as you think about these goals, and even in terms of people's applications, make sure that there are clear goals that are measurable. Ask people to use a logic model or something, but do more than what I have heard and seen today. So to summarize, at least 30% for affordable housing. It's essential. 2, all of this work should be done through a racial equity lens. And 3, there should be measurable outcome measures so that we can see whether something works or doesn't work. And if it works, how do we replicate it? So I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Deborah. Those were very good comments. Who's next? Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony Buono. I'm a first-time town meeting member from Precinct 17. I did not come here with a prepared speech like Deborah and the other speaker, and I'm not going to be as eloquent or as long, though. So that's the benefit. I also come at this opportunity with these funds, viewing what we could do in terms of housing affordability. During my time running for town meeting in Precinct 17, I knocked on a lot of doors, and I ran into at least and met 5 wonderful people who were behind on their rent, and they were all in their retirement, all on fixed income. And that just solidified in my mind how important it is to have emergency rental assistance available to Brookline residents for people who are struggling in these difficult times. And we saw in our most recent town meeting a really moving testimonial from one of our town meeting members who got into a situation where her rent became almost 80% of her income, and she was forced to move out of Brookline. And it was because that she didn't know who to turn to, and she felt like her community abandoned her. And the truth is that we did, and that's why she had to move. Town meeting stepped up. We started the creation of the Housing Stability Department, which the town administrator will work on making. But we need to allocate funds to that department for it to be meaningful. And I think that this committee should allocate some funds to that Housing Stability Department so that they can correctly facilitate what town meeting wants to see. Again, I agree with what Deborah said previously. 30% of this funding should be allocated to housing. In my view, it is the thing that underlines all other problems. And thank you guys for hearing my comments, and thanks for the work you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? Ruth Ann.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Ruth Ann Snyder. I live on Perry Street. I'd like to put in front of you, immediately across the street is 370 Washington Street. It's now a residential building. It's quite beautiful in the character of Victorian buildings in the neighborhood. And it's been purchased by, I'm not going to say names, it's been purchased and before the ZBA now with a proposal to knock it down and create a bagel store, a one-story concrete commercial building. And the neighborhood has stood many times before the planning board saying this is not what we want. This degrades the neighborhood. This degrades the community. It's a main street into Brookline. And so I'm wondering if somehow your community funds could be used. I got the idea just from listening to the presentation, maybe to purchase a building to sell it to somebody else. It's now a residential building, a 3-story Victorian building. I'm sure it could be converted to housing immediately. It's the kind of building that gets converted all the time. I don't know how it would be, but it exists now. It's on the main street of Brookline, and it's going before the zoning board. So I don't know what can be done, but I want to bring it to your attention.
Thank you, Deborah. Ruth Ann. Anyone else in the room would like to make a comment? I see David Jack sitting there, or David King. I get you two mixed up. Anyone else? All right.
Hi, one of the things I thought was, it's Blair Hines here from the planning board. One thing I thought was very important that was brought out in the presentation was combining resources, some with CPA funding and as well as from other town revenue sources. And I just wanted to offer an example, not to say that this is one that would have a high priority, but I think it really illustrates challenges that the town has for funding improvements. I was on both ninth school efforts as a community representative. And one of the things that had come up had been a lot of traffic issues. And one of the key elements when they were thinking about this school at the area where Sewell Playground is, was how you create a safe, route from further south Brookline down near Baker, those neighborhoods, to where the school was. And in fact, the transportation had come up with an example of it in terms of Hammond Street. But one of the things that had come up was, well, they wanted to have a grade separated bicycle path, but there was no money for it. There was barely money for it, even getting the traffic light in. I think the ship has sailed, but I was wondering if something like the CPA would be an example where you did have, let's say, some major street work being done and that you wanted to add something like extra trees. And maybe this is a question to you, or like.
Yes, I was going to say, let's ask Jen to come up.
Whether that would be something that you could do with this kind of fund, is kind of capture different funding sources. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Thank you. So the answer is probably not. If you can argue legally that it's for the purpose of recreation rather than transportation, then yes. If you can argue that the trees are for the purpose of recreation or open space conservation, then yes. But if it's a street tree beautification, it doesn't have anything to do with recreation or preservation of open space, then it wouldn't be eligible. And if it's a bike path for the purpose of primarily transportation rather than recreation, then it wouldn't be. So, it's the devil's in the details, right? So that's my answer. You have to look at the proposal really to see those details.
Thank you, Jen. Anyone else in the room? Yes, Anthony. Okay.
So is the results of the survey going to be published and we could see the crosstabs specifically, like how each, like where the votes were allocated in the survey?
Yes, Laura could talk about that. We had a slide about that. You may have come in later.
Yeah, no. So in the draft community preservation plan that's available on the website as an appendix to the plan, there is detailed summaries and transcripts of the survey and charrette and so on. So you can look at that if you want to learn more about those results.
Okay, so if we've exhausted the questions and comments from the room, let's go to the virtual people who are looking at this on their from the comfort of their house. Pardon me?
You want me to handle that?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So folks in the audience who are with us remotely, and at this time there are 38 of you, so welcome. I'm going to take members of the public that are on Zoom that either have their hand raised or who have messaged me in the chat. So just because the chat started first with requests, I'm going to start there and then move to the hands. But please don't switch or do both because that's going to get complicated. So thank you. So I'm going to recognize Arlene Hill, and it will take me a moment to locate and enable microphones. So bear with me just a moment. It's alphabetical. I'm not seeing. So Arlene, if you have another name that you're using to log into Zoom, please raise your hand and that will at least bring you to the top of my queue. At this time, I can't see Arlene Hill in the audience. I think while we're waiting, I'll probably just move on. Perhaps she's not with us anymore. Okay.
Do you know who's that?
Oh, looks like Arlene Hill is out there. Yep, there she is. Okay. Nancy, would you like me to just enable mics or promote them to panelists?
I think you should promote them so that they can we can see them as well.
Arlene will be rejoining as a panelist. This will just take a moment.
I apologize to members of the audience and also on Zoom. This is our first attempt at this kind of a hybrid meeting in the select board room. So be patient, please. I see Arlene waving her hand.
Yeah, this is me.
Good.
I want to say too, what great work this is. It must have been very detail oriented, and I applaud you. I live in state housing here in Brookline, right at High and Cypress. And I can't open up my windows. And when I get somebody strong to open them, I need a statue to keep them open. So I'm hoping that the windows can be repaired somehow through this fund. And I hope you do little jobs too. We have a little playground in my little cul-de-sac up here. We're up 10 to 30 steps and is my area where I live. And that needs to be redone over. It's got screws missing and sharp edges. And I've lived here 15 years and I've been planting plants and vegetables every summer, but there's like 6 plots I would love to be able to finish. I remember telling one of the kids 2 years ago that these are tomatoes I'm growing. And she said, tomatoes don't come from the ground. They come from Stop and Shop. So it's really important that this kind of thing happens. So, and I agree with Deborah and the other fellow that talked about rents. I'm on Social Security. I didn't get any benefits higher because inflation and food went up so high. There's really, sometimes it comes down to, do I have a car or gas or food or rent? Something's got to go. And it's really difficult. So, but I want to appreciate your work, and please help us in state housing. We're trying to get the state to take up its responsibilities, but not to much avail. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Arlene. Who's next?
Next, we have Carol Caro. I'm going to promote them.
Hi, I have a question. Oh, first, I'm Carol Carroll. I live in precinct 17 in Brookline. My question has to do with whether these funds would be eligible to do something like repair the boardwalks at Hall's Pond. I don't know if many of you have been through Hall's Pond, but during COVID, it had lots and lots of use, and the boardwalks all need to be replaced. And I didn't know whether that kind of project would be eligible for these funds. Thanks.
Thank you, Carol. It's a great question. And Joan is going to take a stab here.
So probably, Carol, what I'm understanding is they're boardwalks to facilitate public use of an open space area, probably over wetlands or something that you can't walk on.
That's correct. It's a sanctuary.
Yes.
It's a sanctuary.
So that would be facilitating recreation, really. And you could repair those or restore them or even replace them.
Oh, that's great news. Thanks.
Okay. Next, I have Naomi. I can't see your last name, but I'll look for you and call on you. Whoops. I don't see a Naomi in the attendees at this time. Naomi, if you are out there, perhaps you could message. Oh, we do have a new message. Is that them? Naomi. Sorry, my computer's having a little bit of difficulty with the scroll function here. She's got her hand up too, that's why. Naomi, you're coming on to be a panelist now.
Hi, Naomi. How are you doing?
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much, Nancy, and to the members of the committee. I'm Naomi Schweitzer. I'm a town meeting member in precinct 10. First, let me just say thank you so much for all of your efforts for putting together this draft plan and all of the community outreach. And also thank you to all the people who made it possible for us to have the CPA, for us to be even having this conversation tonight. It's very exciting to see where we are in this part of the process. I think some of you know part of my work professionally is I work both locally and nationally with HUD and the VA, specifically around affordable housing and ending and preventing homelessness. And so the CPA funds is a critical resource here in Massachusetts that I have a lot of interest in. And very excited that Brookline is joining the other Massachusetts communities who've signed up to use this resource to help us create open space, recreation, and affordable housing resources that we really, really need in the community. So I wanted to make a few comments tonight. The first thing is I wanted to comment on the demographics section of the report and who responded. And I was sad to see that, like many of the surveys that go out in Brookline and the outreach efforts that happen, it felt very similar, and that the large majority of respondents are similar to me: white, middle-aged or older homeowners. And the diversity, the true diversity of our community was not participating in the feedback loop for this. And I know that there were huge efforts made to reach out to folks, and it is difficult to get folks to participate in public processes, but I think we can do more. I would be happy, to talk if we do more surveys and outreach efforts for CPA in the future, and to be, volunteering to help with that effort. I think we can look to the ARPA community process as one example where I think we did get more broad-based community representation. I think as we go forward, and as you're thinking about how you're going to make your decisions around the funds, the equity goals are so clear in the report, and I'm so glad that our town residents elevated that. And I know you have to figure out how you're actually going to evaluate proposals against one of that key goal, along with the environmental goals and some of the other sort of overarching value statements. And one thing I wanted to suggest that you take a look at is the racial equity rubric that was developed for the ARPA proposals as a starting point. It's not the only example. There are many other communities that have racial equity rubrics for scoring proposals. But having something that is very concrete to help us get to our stated equity goals, I think would be very important. And in addition to that, echoing something that Deborah Brown said, making sure that we are bringing in the voices of people who are not as represented typically in our town government and town meeting and in some of the feedback processes that we set up. So for example, you're probably going to laugh when you hear this, but could you think about maybe having an advisory subcommittee to this committee, right? To bring in a broader range of voices to help identify and look at the environmental goals and the racial justice goals that we've stated for ourselves and the community has said are important to us. I also wanted to comment on the housing goals that are stated in the plan. And I think Deborah Brown said something similar, which is that I'd really love to see them be more specific. I do housing work, affordable housing work all the time, and I cannot tell you how many reports I have seen that sit on my desk or go to the State House and that do not have specific measurable goals, and then nothing happens with them. I noticed under some of the recreation and open space goals, there are very specific things like the number of acres, right? And that was lifted from another plan that the town had done. I would love to see a specific number of units that we are going to preserve, rehab, acquire. So how many units are we going to build for very low or extremely low income households? What's our goal? How many units of public housing, right, do we want to help preserve? Thinking about what the prior speaker was talking about in terms of our state public housing, which while we have invested in, needs millions of dollars more of investment. So I'd love to see more specific housing goals under the housing section so that we're really articulating what we'd like to see. I think we all know, and this committee is very sensitive to how dire the housing situation is in Brookline and the greater Boston area. And again, I'm super excited to see that our community uplifted that this was one of the top 2 goals for the community. And I just want to underscore and echo that. It is so rare that we get new funding that can help with affordable housing preservation and the creation of affordable housing. And I would urge the committee to heavily weight the open remaining funds, not the 30% that we're having, 10, 10, and 10, but for the remaining 70% to heavily weight the remainder of that for affordable housing. The need is so real. It is so hard to hear from community members how they're struggling and they can't stay here. And it's also hard to hear from people who would like to be here and they can't be here and accessing our beautiful parks and our excellent schools. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Naomi.
All right, the next person up is Susan Cohen.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Susan Cohen. I'm a commissioner of the Brookline Housing Authority. I also am a member of the Boston Workers Circle, which participates in the GBIO Housing Justice Campaign. And I'm here with one singular objective, which is to emphasize what we've heard previous speakers mention, which is the very, very deep need of the Brookline Housing Authority, particularly for its state-assisted public housing, to access funds for preservation of those units. This is a wonderful asset that the town of Brookline has, the most deeply affordable housing that is offered within the inventory of different types of affordable housing that is all very much needed. But what we need here is to make sure that we're not losing units as we're looking towards maybe looking at increasing inventory in other areas or using our Community Preservation Act money for other good goals. And I think that by focusing on the needs of state-assisted public housing and other public housing in Brookline, we will be fulfilling a lot of the goals that are generally identified by the report as the ones that we want to see happening here, particularly that this housing is really the bastion of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the town of Brookline. I think the demographics that came out in the report from the committee identified how few minorities actually live in Brookline, and particularly those of very low income. And many of those people live in Brookline Housing Authority property. So we will be making it possible for our current residents to enjoy stability in their housing, and they will also have the opportunity for people who are on our waiting list to be housed in decent, safe, and sanitary housing. And it couldn't be more important that we focus our priorities on the housing that we have before we lose it, because it really will be lost if we don't act. It's been decades since it's been adequately funded, and we need that money now. And we also fulfill some other goals. When we address these kind of systemic issues, we're also addressing environmental goals by reducing the greenhouse gases that we use in our developments and otherwise greening our properties. And we want to keep doing that. And as well, it's a resource that allows people to enjoy the benefits of living in a community like Brookline. And we say we want that to happen. And if we say we want that to happen, we should make it happen by putting as much money as we possibly can towards this goal. So I'll stop there. And I thank you very much for your service and for addressing these really important issues.
Thank you, Sue.
Okay, next up, we have David Rockwell.
Okay. Hi, thank you. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, thank you.
Welcome.
David Rockwell. I am also connected with the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization through my church at the United Parish at the corner of Marion and Harvard Streets, home of the Brookline Food Pantry and the Thrifty Threads thrift shop. I want to again echo the emphasis that others have put in on affordable housing and public housing. Both are drastically important needs in Brookline for us to become the diverse community we would like to continue to be. That is very much at risk, it seems to me, with $3,000 rents and $3 million home prices. So I am retired from the Massachusetts Housing Partnership, where I did affordable housing finance for about 25 years. And I can tell you that the CPA funding is very real and very practically beneficial. We financed a number of projects all across the Commonwealth that had CPA funding as part of it. And it's very enabling as a resource to support the cost of these projects. So make no mistake, this is important, an important resource for affordable housing. And on the public housing side, GBIO has been working through its housing justice campaign at the state level on the funding issues that Arlene mentioned and Sue mentioned with the preservation of our state-owned public housing portfolio. There are nearly 500 such units in Brookline. They are at risk. They're in bad shape. The Brookline Housing Authority knows it. They're doing what they can, but they need funding. So the preservation of those units as a use of these of CPA funds would be most beneficial and urgently needed. So thank you for your work. I know it's been a lot of work. We've been tracking your work for several months. Thank you, and thanks to the consultant for the good work that they have done. We appreciate that and look forward to following this more closely. And I do also agree with Naomi's mention about goals. I think at least 30% of an emphasis of your resources towards affordable housing seems the minimum that should be supported. Thank you very much.
Okay, next we have Rhea Paul.
Thank you for this opportunity to talk with you tonight. I want to also second the many opinions that have already been expressed to appreciate all the work you've done on this plan, and also for holding this meeting tonight to give people from the community a chance to have some input. My name is Rhea Paul. I live at 28 James Street. I attend Temple Sinai, which is a member of the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization. GBO's ongoing housing justice campaign currently focuses on expanding affordable housing and the preservation of existing public housing. As David said, Brookline's access to these several $1 million in funding from the CPA is a very welcome opportunity. As you consider the allocation of these funds, I would urge that the CPA committee makes the creation and preservation of affordable housing, which is such a dire need in Brookline due to its appalling high rents and home prices, a key priority for CPA funding. We applaud the emphasis on affordable housing in the draft plan and the recognition in the plan of the importance of preserving Brookline's essential stock of public housing that's already in use. In addition, we all appreciate the importance of open space, recreation, and historic preservation in making Brookline such a desirable place to live. And we're pleased to see continued investments targeted at these important facilities. But we do hope that you'll give housing a central place in your allocations. Because of the soaring costs for housing of all kinds in Brookline, we're at risk of jeopardizing the social and economic diversity that we all value. When rents are commonly above $3,000 a month and houses sell for millions of dollars, Brookline is rapidly becoming affordable only to the very wealthy. So many of us have experienced the heartache of seeing our own children and other family members unable to live here, where many grew up, because of the prohibitive housing market. And after years of deferred maintenance at the hands of the state, Brookline is at risk of actually losing some of the public housing units we have due to disintegrating building envelopes, roofs, and siding, as well as dangerous electrical and plumbing problems. These issues, rather than representing maintenance needs, threaten the integrity and safety of the public housing units. And as stated in the 2013 DHCD memo, CPA funds are explicitly authorized to be used by local housing authorities for preservation of buildings experiencing such decline. I urge you to consider giving affordable housing and public housing preservation a prominent place in your CPA planning and funding. Thank you again for your service and for the
Thank
opportunity.
you. Thank you.
Okay, next, Bonnie Bastian.
Everybody. My name
Hello,
is
Bonnie.
Hi, my name
How
is
are
Bonnie Bastian. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 5. I'm also a renter in Brookline. This past spring, town meeting passed a bylaw that requires us to create an Office of Housing Stability in Brookline. And I'm thrilled about this. It's an absolute critical need for this town. These funds, CPA funds, would go a long way to be able to establish this resource in town and really make it sustainable and effective and efficient. And I thoroughly believe that this office goes hand in hand with the development of truly affordable housing, with the issues that folks in the Brookline Housing Authority bring up endlessly, because the buildings are just horrid. And unaffordable rents and really bad landlords. These things require a place to go, to be able to access resources, advice, and this would go a long way to help people be able to stay here and to stay in their housing. As I said before, I'm a renter, and I currently, for the past 11 years that I've lived in my home, have been experiencing huge struggles with my landlord. Yet I can't afford to move someplace else in this town at this moment. So, the resources that I personally require don't exist right now. I need someone to help me think about whatever online resources are available to be able to find lawyer support, or to understand, what things like reasonable accommodation might be, or on and on. Currently, there's nowhere except the internet on my own to try and navigate that situation. So I just want to put a fine point, or I want to emphasize how critically important that is to all aspects of affordable housing in this town. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe we've reached the end of the comments and the raised hands. Oh, wait, there is one more raised hand.
Okay.
So David Brick, gonna have him come up.
Hello. Am I hearable and visible? Oh,
I
good.
see you.
Great. So I just wanted to share. I've really appreciated
Could you
all
tell
of
us your name?
That's a great idea.
Thank
My
you.
name is David Brick. I um, live currently on Aspinwall Hill, and I wanted to appreciate all the things that people have been saying, and I've heard a lot of voices about support for more housing, affordable housing, um, and care for that, and accessibility of it. And I agree. Um, and so I was a resident of, let's see, the first 3 years that I lived in Brookline, from 2011 to 2014, I was in subsidized housing. And then from 2014 until last year, I was in public housing, uh, housing authority housing. And such a blessing, so needed, uh, and just a tremendous gift to my life. And I just want to throw in a voice. I don't think it's needed. I think everybody here and everybody on the committee appreciates the importance of the other priorities in addition to housing. But I want to put in a voice for the open space as well, because while I was living in that housing, the small bits of parks and green spaces were like absolutely critical to my mental health, my well-being, while I was living there. And it didn't feel like enough. But I took the pieces that I could get, and that was a great gift too. But anyways, but I just wanted to throw in that voice that I guess in some sense is echoing the first speaker as well, that these things are complementary, and one supports another, and they're all needed. So that's all. Thank you all.
very much. Thank you. Okay, so we've exhausted our.
No, we have not.
Oh,
There are more
okay.
hands up. We're going on to Mary Kantz. Mary will be rejoining us as a panelist.
Hi, my name is Mary Kantz, also known as Beth Kantz. I live at 106 Oakland Road Extension here in Brookline. And I want to, like others, thank you for all the work that you've done on this particular issue. I think it's been wonderful how both you focused on community education and information, and also in getting feedback from an array of community members. I also want to echo what others have said in terms of prioritizing housing affordability and availability of affordable housing when it comes to CPA priorities. But I also would like to sort of identify another opportunity that's related to that, and that is I actually live over near the veterans housing that's on the corner of High Street and Cypress. And I thought Arlene Hill did a wonderful job talking about the opportunities for preserving that housing. I think it's representative of state housing throughout the city or throughout the town. But the opportunities that are there for preserving that, the internal conditions of the housing, and also for enhancing the grounds of state-funded housing as well. I'm thinking that it would be helpful to potentially prioritize the recreation and open spaces around some of the housing affordable housing complexes that we have with that 10% of funding, minimum 10% of funding that we have earmarked for recreation and open space. I think it's an unusual opportunity to be able to have any funds for improving the grounds around the affordable housing here in Brookline. It would be a great opportunity to take advantage of what CPA might offer. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have A. Madison.
I think that's Arlene.
So in order to make comment, you will need to unmute your microphone.
Hi, sorry about that.
Hi, Arlene.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. Thank you for your work. I would like to say, I live in precinct 5 and would like to say that I see open space as both a sustainability and an equity issue. So much of what we try to offer people who live in Brookline is a healthy environment and the quality of life that makes it worth being here. So one of our real deficits has been open space per person in Brookline. Over the years, we've looked at our open space plans as an opportunity to increase that open space, but our problem has been that we've never had a source of funding. And so the CPA is really maybe our only opportunity to have an ongoing, reliable source of funding for acquisition of open space so that we can provide more green space and play space for people who are living particularly in our most dense parts of town, but also even in terms of things like acquisition of Allendale Farm someday, possibly. We really have given some of our priorities in Brookline, some sources of ongoing income in having other kinds of trust funds, but never an open space. We don't have a land trust. So I'm requesting or asking that you seriously consider an ongoing requisition for acquisition from the 70% of the unallocated funds, something that we can rely on and build on because land is so expensive in Brookline, and hopefully eventually accumulate enough money to really be able to do something that's meaningful. I would also say that it's a little bit of a difficulty, I guess, for those in the open space and recreation community that we need to split our 10%. So again, I would ask that maybe you look at that 70% as an opportunity to really look at the applications you get in open space, in recreation, and maybe even in historic resource, because we certainly have some historic parks and some elements in our parks that can benefit from sharing in those pots. But I do hope that an ongoing reliable fund will be something that will be very much a part of the CPA. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Arlene. Thank you, Arlene.
Okay, I believe now we have exhausted our public comment from both in person and online. I do want to remind everyone that we did receive 3 public comment letters,
Right.
and those are available in the public meetings folder, accessible to the committee and to the public.
Right. Thank you. We had planned 8:30-ish as an end of this meeting, and I'd said earlier that we wouldn't take comments from the committee, but it seems to me that we have a few minutes. And Blair, I kind of ignored that issue when Blair raised his, because I knew what he was going to ask about, and I wanted to hear the answer. But I think that, I'd like to hear from comments from others of you, if you have them, about the draft plan at this point. And I'd like to know, I'd like a little bit more guidance from Jen on eligibility issues. And one of the things that I was curious about was the role of that group called Historic New England, which does that hold deeds for many other communities as well, or was that just, I don't even remember, it was Salem or?
Yeah, Historic New England holds deed restrictions all over New England. They have very specific criteria for the type of resource that they would hold deed restrictions on. And I don't know it well enough to state it, but it has to be something that's very historic. And I know they own and also hold restrictions on a lot of first period homes, as an example, and buildings from the 1700s and not so much later, but that's not to say that there could be worthy homes or buildings that are later time period. I just know they have very specific criteria. Yeah.
Okay, it was just one question I had that I had not thought to ask earlier. But is anyone else, David, you have a question?
Well, thank you, Nancy. David Lescuyer, Vice Chair of the CPA. I want to really thank all of the people that have provided comments. This has been very helpful and meaningful. I think for me, and I imagine for all of the members of the committee, the next step, I mean, some of the comments have been along the line of we have to have specific goals or whatever. The next step is now for those who want to see things happen, which would be eligible for CPA funding, to put together the proposals. What we actually do with these funds will be very much in the hands of town departments, nonprofit organizations, advocacy groups in the community to develop proposals and bring them to us, so then we can apply some of the policies and priorities that are in this plan and actually do that. So if we're going to get 30% for housing, we're going to have proposals, solid proposals, to enable us to fund to that extent or maybe more. So thank you very much.
One other comment I'd like to make, just to educate people in the community. We, as of right now, we have about $6.5 million. And, but I want people to recognize that that's 2 years worth of money. So going forward, it seems like we'll be in the ballpark of 3 million plus a year. So it's not, and by the time we get to the funding cycle next May, we think we'll have around between 9 and 10 million. So, but that's only going to be the first go round. After that, if we allocate it all, the amount declines precipitously. So I just want people to keep that in mind. That will be the first round, and we may end up holding some of that back for the other years. But the point is that, in terms of going forward, I think we can probably estimate around 3 million plus per year. So just so people are educated about that issue. Anybody else? Sam, did you have any questions? Joanne?
Yes, thanks, Nancy. I want to thank everybody for coming and those on the Zoom, and especially those who commented. I think it shows that this is certainly something people are very interested in, committed to, and following very closely. But one comment I'd just like to bring forward again is I think, Jen, you commented that often CPA funds can be used as part of a larger funding mechanism for a larger project. And with my background in affordable housing, I know that if there is new affordable housing being built, sometimes there are a number of different funding sources. There can be up to 15 or 16 different funding sources. So certainly one good way to think about CPA funding, should there be a proposal for, let's say, new affordable housing, is that it's possible that the CPA funding could be just a piece of several other sources of funding. So I hope that people will keep that in mind when they consider proposals and when they consider what to submit to the CPA committee for consideration and for town meeting to approve, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have a comment, Minnie?
No,
At this
no
point?
comment. I just want to say that I appreciated everybody coming and commenting. It was really certainly helpful to me to hear the different kind of ideas and perspectives. So thank you.
Okay.
Say
You want to?
something
Okay.
briefly.
All right.
Yeah, thank you, everybody who commented. I think it's important to, no matter what your personal angle is and your priorities and areas of focus, just if you're interested in submitting proposals or aiding in that effort, just to kind of consider and factor in everything that's been said tonight from, all these different valuable perspectives, and to really focus on, incorporating all of those elements into your proposals and being very interdisciplinary, because I think that's the most effective way to advance your priorities or your project in general. And I think it was clear from the results of the survey that just people in general are very interested in projects that incorporate all of these elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, I think we go just about 8:30. So unless the consultants have any more words of wisdom for us, we'll conclude the hearing now. I want to thank everyone who echo the thanks of everyone who took the trouble to come either to town hall or get on Zoom and spend the time with us, helping us sort out our tasks ahead. And our schedule is has been posted online, so you can find it. Our next full meeting will be in August. I believe it's August 17th. And in the meantime, committee will do some work in between. We expect to have our draft plan become a final plan around the first week of September. And at that point, we'll begin accepting some applications. We'll have some materials developed for you to use to make your applications. And then we'll go from there. We'll have have to first to determine the eligibility of your project, and then discuss the merits as we go forward. Again, these projects will not be funded until May town meeting is done, or the annual town meeting in May. So it does seem like a long time, but believe you me, it will pass quickly. And we look forward to working with you all on those projects. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you to our consultants who did an excellent job. We really appreciate the work that you put in. Thank you.
Nancy, I just want to correct that the August meeting is on the 14th.
Okay, sorry about that. August 14th. There will be a full committee meeting. That will not be hybrid. It will be on Zoom. Okay, great. Thank you.
Are you going to continue the meeting to the other agenda items?
Oh, sorry. Tell Blair to come back. David. We have some minutes that we need to approve. So can you please stand? I want you to sit down again. We have some minutes. That's right. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say the same thing, so.
Yeah, okay. We're going to continue our meeting for just a few minutes. We'll take care of some routine business here. One is approval of minutes. If folks. Sean Lynn, could you?
I'm sorry, we're still in.
We thought so, but we realized we have some minutes. It was my fault. I indicated the wrong thing. Yeah.
Yes, minutes.
Okay. So tell us about the minutes. If you could put up the agenda again.
Yes, I would love to tell you about the minutes. It says approval of minutes.
Right.
I loaded them so long ago. Just a moment.
And we do have a quorum here in the room, which was important for a hybrid meeting. So I thank you all for attending in person. And John attended on Zoom, so he can count if he's still there. I don't know. He may have dropped
He
off.
might not have. Yeah,
That's okay. He may have dropped off, but we still have a quorum. So
I'm almost there. Hold on. Let's see when they were for. Oh. So they were the minutes of 6:12 and the minutes of 6:26.
all right. Do you want to divide the question, or shall we vote them in one as a group?
Vote them as a group.
All right. Okay. Can I have a motion?
I move.
Okay. David moves and Joanne seconds that we approve the minutes of June the 12th and June the 26th. Correct dates, Tina?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
David?
Aye. You
Sam?
don't have to do it.
I know, but I'll just do it this way. Okay. And John, is John still on?
John is gone.
Okay. All right. So it's a vote of 6.
6-0.
6-0. We approve the minutes.
Okay.
All right.
We're up to date on our minutes.
What?
We're up to date on approving minutes.
Yeah.
The next item is public comment for items not on the agenda.
Okay. I doubt that there are any, but
We have 9 attendees.
Yes.
General.
all right, there are 9 attendees. Is there anyone who obviously not in the room, everyone here is left, but anybody on Zoom want to make a comment on items that were not on the agenda?
I don't see any hands up and there's nothing in the chat.
Okay, I'll assume that the answer is no. We still thank you for coming, and we can adjourn the meeting now.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
So we didn't have the job description available.
No, we don't.
That's correct.
Not yet.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay, just so you know, the job description for a staff position is being done, and but we don't really, it's still in draft form, and yeah. So
Like board voted to.
yes,
the-
they voted to approve it, and so we're on the path to
Right.
yeah, get a full-time staff person to assist us, hopefully by the fall.
It's one foot in front of the other. right?
Correct. Yep. Okay,
That's
I
it.
think that's it, right,
Okay.
Tina?
Yes, that's
Okay.
everything. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks to
Thank you,
Kara
Tina.
for all her work as well.